So now, without any further delay, I would like to turn things over to TV News Check contributing editor Janet Stilson, who will introduce our first panel of the day on data, technology, and optimizing spot TV. Janet?
Hello, everybody. I am very pleased to be moderating the first session of this webinar, which promises to be amazing from start to finish. But let me tell you, we have some interesting people from the agency and TV station group business to talk about a few little things like data, technology, and optimizing spot TV. I'm not going to give you any long preamble because it's more important for you to hear from our guests. And I can tell you from our prep call that they have some very interesting and opinionated things to say. I'm going to be taking some questions from the audience in the last 5 or 10 minutes of the session. So please give us your thoughts. You might want to wait until at least half an hour has gone by because we may have answered your question by that point. So without further ado, let me introduce you to our panelists. We have Eric Kavanaugh, who is SVP Data Intelligence for Publicis Media, Jennifer Hungerbuehler, EVP Managing Director, Local Video and Audio Investment for Dentsu, Frank Friedman, VP of Consumer Engagement, Local Media at the EW Scripps Company, and Brad Thompson, SVP Partner, Integrated Investment at Worldwide. Okay, so the first topic that I want to cover is measurement. And I'm going to be asking you to answer a question each in turn. I'm going to start with you, Jennifer. I want to talk about what's going on with the research companies. Nielsen, obviously, we're all at a bit of a crossroads. Nielsen just lost its MRC accreditation. There's a lot of competitors chomping at the bit to take its role as the leading research company that buyers and sellers rely on. What do you think is going to happen? How is this going to play out?
Well, thanks first off for having me. I'm very excited to be participating on this panel. Yeah, lots happened in the last week with Nielsen, and I think that this is going to be good for the future because what this is going to do is it's going to bring a lot of new players along with some new solutions. And I think the speed and the innovation that we need for video measurement is finally going to start happening because we've been talking about it for a really long time. And I think what's like most critical that comes out of all of this process of vetting these new vendors and solutions is that we need a transparent solution. We need something that is going to capture audience behavior, and we need something that is still going to be verifiable.
Okay, what's your thoughts on that, Frank?
Well, I think Jennifer nailed it. I think we're at a real inflection point here in our measurement evolution, if you will. I'm heartened that we do have, an MRC group here to keep us accountable. We need to continue to look at these different measurement companies, even as they work through accreditation and remediation of that. So there's a ton of people that want to step into this space though, but we have to realize this is going to take some time. This is not going to get fixed in a day. And buyer and sellers have a line like I've never seen in my entire career. We all know that we have issues and we have to deal with them together.
Eric, do you think that, I'm just wanting to find out if you think that there can be more than one or two winners in this beauty contest? In other words, can companies afford more than one or two, or maybe not even two?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that there are costs for a variety of services, not just in terms of money, but also time spent, right? And so what I believe will happen is, even if in the short term we look at several different options, long term, there's just going to be an evolution towards a single provider, a single currency, because I think that's the way that companies like to do business. We like to aggregate money on the agency side on behalf of many of our clients. We like to spend it with our partners who are often, large holding companies. So I think that for an efficiency play, long term, we'll see fewer players with fewer types of currency.
What's your feelings about that, Brad?
Yeah, Janet, I would agree with that. And thank you for having me as well. I think some of the keywords that have stood out to me as we started discussing this already is transparency and efficiencies. I think to Eric's point, I think you're going to see a lot of solutions suggested to start, but I think we have to start to come back to a more uniform common currency that we're going to be able to work with. I don't think you're going to have transparency without it. I think the vision of a lot of different data sources outside of just the financial obligations that would go into that and the time obligations, it's hard to have that oversight and have that insight into what you're getting with a number of different data sources. So I do see an evolution where we start maybe with a lot of different solutions and vetting those, but we come back to a common point that we can all agree upon.
Jennifer, what do you think that MRC accreditation is really important?
I do. We stand behind the MRC because it is important that we have independent verification of third-party measurement. Like, that's just important, and absolutely stand behind it.
Frank,
can I add on to that, if you don't mind?
Sure.
I just wanted to point out that as troubling as this is for Nielsen to lose their accreditation, I want people to remember that this is an example of the process working the way it's designed to. The MRC does the heavy lifting with the audits, and they found something wrong. We had a company that said this is how we're doing it, and this is what you're getting. The MRC said, I don't think you're remaining true to that promise, so we're going to take away accreditation. That's the way that it's designed to work, and that's why, to Jennifer and also Frank's point, that's why MRC is so important, because we need someone to verify what these companies are say they're providing is what they're actually providing.
And I think it's interesting that to date only Nielsen has been accredited. They're not now, but ComScore is trying to. But Frank, what do you think about all this?
Well, I would just add, we were talking about the cost earlier. The cost of these currencies from buyer and seller have been escalating way past typical inflationary rates. So if you look at the cost of currency as a percentage of sales, it's far exceeding where it should be. I would also add that the cost of doing an MRC audit has now, continued to rise because of the complexity of it. We're not going to have any solutions that are less complicated, I can tell you that. If we're talking about bringing in more big data sources, the amount of rigor that's going to be involved in analyzing this and making sure that it is transparent, to Jennifer's point, is going to cost even more. So we have an inflection point too on how much are we going to spend on this. These companies that come to provide us solutions, there's going to have to be a streamlining of that process, I believe. I think the MRC needs to take another look at that so that we have more folks coming in without the onerous burden that is put on them to even get in the process.
Yeah, I could not agree more, Frank. I mean, I feel that we need a better commercial model that's going to be more representative of the landscape moving forward. So 100% agree.
Well, and I'm just wondering, NBC Universal has made it very clear that it's been conducting its own evaluation of these various research companies. Others are as well. I'm wondering, do you see a point in time when buyers and sellers, or maybe just sellers and buyers are going to get together and say, this is our it girl as such, in terms of, who the primary source of research is going to be? Jennifer, you want to take that first?
Sure. Okay, so I do think we're going to end up coming around an industry solution around measurement. So this, I sort of have like a two-part answer. So I do think we'll sort of align on where we all go. But I think when it comes to the currency that we're going to transact on, that's going to become more of a buyer and seller. Because I think as we start to optimize our buys even more, what we're going to want to transact on with that measurement is it's going to vary by client, by KPI, by advertiser, by agency. So I think that it's really a two-part thing. We'll have a standardized measurement, but the currency that we negotiate on could vary.
Okay. Eric, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I can see a time in the future where we start to rethink the value of third-party measurement. You know, Frank was talking about the costs and the solutions being so exorbitant. I mean, I think we can all agree, you know, one of the benefits of having a third-party measurement is that transparency. But what if we could establish the transparency in a different way that didn't require a third party, which required maybe a technological solution as opposed to a third party, where we could get the data from the publishers and the stations directly, and you know, maybe think about that as an industry-wide solution, maybe to Jennifer's point, as opposed to an outside company, because potentially that could be a more transparent and actually cost-reducing solution in the long term.
What do you think of that, Frank? Does that make sense?
I think it's a fascinating scenario. I think, look, we should think about what the MRC's role is, by the way. It's not to tell us which currency we're going to transact on. That is definitely a buyer and a seller alignment. What they do is make sure that whatever those measurement companies say their standards are, that they follow them. And that's not an easy road sometimes, because they're not very transparent. We're experiencing that now with our friends at Nielsen. So I think as the currency evolves, as we start looking at different measure points, you know, like first party data and such, this could get really interesting. We'll definitely want to have a streamlined approach. We may have multiple different scenarios going on before we align, but for sure we have to also agree on how we measure and value an impression, whether it's video versus digital, and there's a long way to go on that.
Right. So, Eric, I just want to swing back to you once more, just because I want to make sure I understand what you were saying. In other words, the industry would create a technology or a technology platform, essentially monitored and maintained by various players within the buyer and seller community, as opposed to going to third-party research companies. Do I have that right?
Yeah. So when you think about it, we're paying a lot of money to make sure that the 1 million impressions that we negotiated on, we're actually getting 1 million impressions, and so we rely on a third-party company to tell us that. But at a certain point, if we're spending so much money to verify those 1 million impressions, couldn't there be a way to us to have a direct feed with, as video becomes more digitally delivered, to just say, hey, you said we agreed on 1 million, you said 1.1, our ad servers say 900,000. Let's find a way to make that work so that we're not spending the millions of dollars to just kind of get to that middle ground, right? I just think that there are all sorts of options on the table. And again, as everything moves to digital, why can't we align on what the definition is of an impression and monitor each other in a transparent way so that we can sort of maybe avoid those costs of third-party measurement?
Brad, I'm interested in your thoughts about that. And in particular, just as I'm sort of running this through my mind, like if you have, let's say, 20 different companies, just for the sake of argument, who are all putting their opinions together to put together this technology. Could it be a long and difficult process to come to a meeting of the minds, or do you think it's much simpler?
Yeah, I think it would be a long and difficult process. I don't, everyone's shaking their heads and saying the same thing. There are so many players in this, and we all have our own unique business requirements and our financial requirements, and there are outside sources we have to deal with, like auditors. I think this would be a long, long process. I am not saying we should not explore it, because I do think it's fascinating. But it's you're talking about getting consensus across a very wide spectrum of groups of people that are in this business, and that is going to take some work.
Okay. All right. Well, I want to move on to my next question, which is specific to Nielsen, and I'd like to ask it to Frank. I'm just wondering, as you look at the data that EW Scripps is receiving now from Nielsen versus what you were receiving before COVID struck, what's the difference? How would you describe it?
Well, I think there was a lot of discussion and commentary on, were we in good shape before COVID with Nielsen? The answer is resoundingly no. We had problems with sample size before COVID. We had issues with sample imbalance, the weighting that was required to fix that, and the variability. What COVID did was it just made it even worse. And I think exposed the challenges of how do we manage a panel when we can't get into people's homes. So I think now, as we look at all of this, and Nielsen's rightly examining their policies, there was a lot that happened during COVID that we didn't know about. There were changes in measurement that weren't communicated to us. And I think we're still going through all that process now. But what it does say is that we need extreme transparency. When we enter these kind of environments, there's no clear solution. Certainly Nielsen has to run its business. But as we're paying the bills for them to do so, we want to understand that data as it comes out. And it's only gotten worse. So we have significant challenges to repair the panels, to get them back to pre-COVID levels, and then continue to fix the challenges of having a balanced sample across age and ethnic representation.
I was under the impression that they had been doing a lot of work to try to repair the damage done during COVID. Is that true, or do you see them making any movement or progress at all?
It's a challenge. We have multiple markets. We have multiple constituencies, different geographies. We have 4 or 5 different methodologies. To be able to manage all of those and keep them synced up is a monumental task. And while we have some minor improvements in some of the balance, the sample size is still woefully challenged. And when that's not in line, we have to weight it to get it where it needs to be. And that causes variability issues. So a very delicate process.
Well, Eric, do you agree that there was things that Nielsen wasn't telling stations and buyers? And if so, are there certain things that you wish you could have known from them?
Well, yes. I mean, they've said as much, that sort of while they were in the process, only sort of when they looked back, they said, okay, these are some of the things we could have let stations and agencies know about. Had they told us, I don't know if that would have impacted the outcome in terms of the data, right? It would have been good for us to know, to tell our clients in advance, but I don't think that us knowing could have led to better outcomes with the data. And I think, Frank spoke to this, but there's short challenges beforehand, and with Nielsen before COVID, we are adding TV adjacent or TV like measurement to a system that's designed for television. I think that's difficult. And I think that, you know, one of the things about the MRC accreditation is Nielsen was tasked with rebuilding their sample while simultaneously expanding it to bring in these broadband only homes, absolutely necessary. But I think it's hard to do both. I mean, again, to Frank's point, this is a lot of different methodologies and a lot of different approaches and just a lot going on. So I'm glad that Nielsen's taken the time to focus on bringing that panel strength back up before they move on to the broadband only expansion.
And I want to get into the BBO expansion, but before we leave this question, I'm just wondering, Frank or Eric, give me an example of something that they didn't communicate to you so that I have a sense of what you're talking about.
Well, we know for a fact that there were homes that were left in the sample that that shouldn't have been. I think you know, you can argue the semantics of when Nielsen knew, but the fact is we didn't know. And we had a simulation done that showed there was undercounting of these metrics. That was really challenging to hear. I wish we could have had a lot more granular data on that. You know, we, as broadcasters, paid millions of dollars in make good weight that we shouldn't have. There's nothing we can do about it now. But I think that just gives you a very clear and present challenge. We need more transparency.
So Brad, I want to ask you about the introduction of BBO homes into the local sample, which has just, the new start date is January. I'm wondering, first of all, since this has been delayed several times, do you think that it's really going to happen in January? And do you have confidence that that's a realistic start date, given what has to happen to get it into the sample?
I mean, short answer, no. Yeah, it's a matter of faith at this point. This has been rescheduled at the last minute twice. It's a relationship, and that relationship has been damaged to some degree. I don't have faith at this point. I'm not saying that they won't, but it's hard to have faith. And I think the bigger concern is, as they make the changes that have been suggested, we're not going to have enough data to truly negotiate off of going forward. We're going to have one impact book of data based on these changes, and that puts us in a very bad position going forward from a negotiation standpoint. I mean, we have had to regroup twice now on this to handle these delays. But even if it comes out, we are still stuck in a position of not knowing how to price and how to negotiate and how to move forward with this. It's very challenging.
Jennifer, I see you shaking your head. Yes. Would you like to add on to that?
Yeah, I mean, so look, so there was impact data for the set meter and the LPMs this whole year. It's been going, but it was on a different criteria. At that point, we had the 5 minutes of local tune-in. And now they're, you know, so that criteria is kind of now null and void, because now they're just bringing in the broadband only homes. And to his point earlier, that's just going to leave us with 1 month of data. It's October. We are already in the market buying 2022, right? By the time I get that October data, I'm going to be so far down the way. And that really makes me nervous, because we're essentially going in blind, and it could have huge posting implications and reporting implications. So, you know, it is an aggressive date to set to go that quickly without more data. I mean, if you think about how buyers buy and sellers sell, we've been doing it on trends, because that's the best we've had to date. And even if you start using some algorithms, you're adding in a totally different universe, and we have, you know, 1 month. So I'm nervous. I mean, I think that it is a very aggressive timeline to go live.
So Janet, when those buys are already done and you get that impact, Jennifer, will you guys go back and redo those? What's the
like go backwards in time?
Will you go
I
back
think
and
what
revise
we're
that?
going to have to do, Frank, is just the stewardship element is going to be critical. Like we're just going to have to do what we've been doing all through Corona, is really watching the ratings. And I think the other part that adds to the complexity of this is that we don't have great transparency into the consumer habit shift. So how many people actually stopped watching linear television and they're watching it on a streaming device that is not watermarked or counted? And I asked Nielsen for some data on that. And there were 10 markets that they did, and it was a significant percent. So in addition to having the broadband change, we've got consumer habits changing that we don't have transparency in to take into account into our numbers. So the best we have right now is that we just have to literally steward our buys to the best of our ability and rely on our sellers to also be informing so that all eyes are on delivery, because that is the best we have right now. And could it change posting parameters and client parameters as we go? Sure, because we're all having these conversations with our clients right now to say, what is this going to look like for us moving forward? So,
Well, so
really,
Eric, go ahead. You were going to say something anyway.
well, I was just going to pile on to this, right? You know, the date seems arbitrary, right? Like next year, we'll just push it back by a quarter. To Jennifer's point, there's a lot to do. But I don't get a sense in the marketplace, and at least on the agency side, which I know better, that while we acknowledge the importance of adding these broadband only homes, I'd rather wait until the product is ready as opposed to set these dates and miss them, right? Because all it does is add time and effort and confusion. And I don't think that Nielsen's doing themselves any favor by continually changing the goalpost and the methodology around broadband only. It doesn't help their case. We talk about accuracy and how important it is, and it certainly is, but stability is also very important in this business. And that has been severely lacking from Nielsen.
Okay. All right. And just one last question related to this. Is it the sample, is it the same plan that they had before, in that these will be broadband only homes as long as they can pick up local television, and then they're going to move to all broadband only homes later on? No?
Just all in. Yeah.
It's all in.
All broadband.
It's all in. Okay. All right. So it's not a two-step process anymore. Okay. All right. So another part of what Nielsen announced recently is its Impressions First initiative. And I'd like to get your thoughts on, on what you think of that, if that makes sense. Frank, you want to lead the discussion?
Well, I think the move to impressions is definitely where we need to go. It helps us monetize all levels of programming. My concern, or the challenge I think the industry needs to think about, is if we have variability issues with lower rated shows, when we start buying programs that have 5, 10, or 15 impressions, the relative error is going to be so huge. To Jennifer's point, we're going to need to pay particularly close attention to how we're stewarding those buys. So while we have a balance here of, we want to make sure we can monetize and create value across all day parts, we also have to be able to post it and keep the auditors happy.
Jennifer, what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I totally agree with Frank. It's great. I'm glad we've gone to impressions. It's long overdue. We've been talking about it for what, Janet, years at this point. So yeah. I'm glad. What I feel like Nielsen taking a stand, being bold in their statement, saying this is going to become our primary point of measurement is good. And where I think it's really going to help us is more on the back end with the client reporting, because, we're going in and we're negotiating on this, but in some cases, our clients, they're tied to ratings in their media mix modeling and the way they're doing their reporting. So what I'm hoping this will do is make the companies like the media mix modelers, the auditors, and so on and so forth, really start to change their technology to be able to ingest impressions so that we can just do everything on impressions and not have to do any more conversions. So I'm hopeful that this will help move the other side of the transaction parts. like, the clients and the companies that measure for clients.
Right. And Brad, do you have any concerns about measurement of programs that get, very, very, relatively few audience members, and the accuracy of the data given the sample size?
Yeah, I mean, I think there will always be those issues. To Frank's point, once we're buying programming with that little viewership, any variability can cause issues. But I don't think staying on a ratings-based system helps that in any way. I think buying impressions can only help in regards to how we move forward with that. And if I can just tag on to what Jennifer said, if we can do away with conversions, that will be a fantastic day in the industry. I have done more conversions over the past 5 years that I never want to do again. And I do think Nielsen making this step is a necessary one to help us get out of that, because I think investment teams doing it on their own, to Jennifer's point, planning, clients, audit, they're all still working on ratings. With Nielsen or the measurement company we're using leading the way, I think that will be a huge help in moving forward in that process.
Eric, I've seen you shake your head yes several times over the course of this conversation. I'm just curious, this whole conversion process, is it a real time suck?
Yeah, for sure. And I think about the way that I think about impressions, how we could have circumvented a lot of some of the issues around broadband only had we been an impressions first sort of industry even a couple of years ago. When you think about the reason behind the calculations of qualified BBO and sum of weights, all of that would have been avoided had we just gone to an impression-based view from the get-go. So I'm incredibly thrilled, because I think this in some ways helps future-proof the process a little bit moving forward.
Okay, great. So
can I ask a question?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So Jennifer, how do your planners and your teams take those video impressions and add them to the linear TV? How do you value those?
I mean, right now we're doing an impression as an impression. So when we are putting our plans together, we are dividing it. So our buyers don't go into the market and buy the digital video. We have a separate team within our local team that will buy those impressions, and then we put them together. So right now, while not perfect, the impression is the impression.
Okay. All right. So I wanted to ask a question to our panelists regarding how the business rules are changing. I know from our discussion yesterday that, Frank, you had some strong opinions about how they should change or how they are changing. You want to get into it a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. I think we've had some really breakthrough wins with many of our agency partners, Jen and your team, working on a pay for performance model that really kind of upends the manual process that we've been doing for decades. So the big part of that is that we're, the sellers, are optimizing these buys in real time. We're using algorithms to help us ensure that we're posting and delivering that bottom line all the way to the end of the flight. We used to get the post buy. We had hundreds of points to make good. And we'd be making them good till the cows came home. We'd never finish. We would just keep doing it over and over. I think this is a paradigm shift, monumental proportions, because look, Jen and Brad and your teams, you don't have time to spend 30% of your time doing post buys. Maybe it's more. That's what it used to be when I was there. We got to fix that. So while the measurement's not particularly giving us an assist, I do think that us working together, buyer and seller, opening up those lines of communication, changing the rules of how we do business, and creating these innovative ways of landing the plane, if you will, and making sure we're doing it appropriately, it makes a big difference.
Well, Jennifer, when concerning pay-per performance or other forms of business rule changes, is this at this point, where are we in the process? Do you see it as very early days and EW Scripts is among few TV station groups that are doing it, or where are we?
Well, I think a lot of people are dipping their toe in the water right now. So we're working with a lot of seller groups, and while we have created sort of a terms and condition and business rules in general, some are tweaked based on the individual station group's capabilities and what they can and cannot do. So in that regard, we're still moving forward. But I think that it's been great so far. Like, you just have to have that conversation. Like, do we still have some challenges around the RPD plus markets? Yes, because it takes us a little bit longer to get some of the information. And so we find those markets a bit more challenging, and we're still trying to figure out what's the best business rule for those markets. But the point is these conversations are happening, and they're happening with a lot of different ownership groups. And we are testing and learning. It is trial and error. Do we get it right every time? No. Does the station get it right every time? No. But what it does is it allows us to change, modify, and move on. And so it's all exciting stuff. I think now, next, as we start to get more and more adoption of this, which I do implore everyone to please do this, because like Frank said, I don't want to chase under delivery, wait until the dawn of time. But, as we move to, more business-based outcomes, things like that, like, we have to get used to these conversations of changing the terms and conditions and business rules. We cannot just be stuck in this old mold. We have to be looking, adopting, and innovating.
Okay. Eric and Brad, do you have other thoughts on that topic, or should we move on to the next question?
I mean, I would just add, which I think Jennifer was hinting at, I don't think we can evolve without it. I think the next steps, guaranteeing off of audiences rather than broad demographic, all these things, whether it's impression-based buying or whether it's pay for performance, those are all part and parcel of what we're doing. You can't have one without the other. And I think these business rules have to adjust if we want to truly evolve what we're doing going forward.
Okay.
And I would just agree with everything that's been said, and also say that if we're looking to, I don't know, the way that we're doing business now for Nielsen or any other player to come in and sort of, fix things while we sit by and just watch, that's not a solution. I think we need to be aggressive and take action and think about different ways of doing business, because certainly the consumers and our clients' needs are changing, and we need to change with them.
Hey, I got a question for you, Eric. Do you see a time as these currencies evolve where we stop posting off of day, date, and time to 100%? It's statistically impossible, by the way. It's statistically impossible to do what we're trying to do. We're planning to fail by putting in make good weight up front and stewarding the buy as it goes. That doesn't seem like a logical way to keep doing business. Do you see, could we create more understanding of this to the auditors and push back on them and get us to change how we do this? What do you think?
Well, is it about pushing back? I mean, I think it's about trying to find something that's so everyone walks away a winner, right? Because the auditor's clients are also my clients, right? And by de facto, your clients as well. So I think you're right. How do we educate? How do we grow together? How do we make sure that everyone feels like they're part of the solution? For sure. That having been said, I totally agree. Posting on day, date, and time is not going to work. It hasn't worked for a long time. Nielsen itself has said, don't do it. They haven't done it vocally enough because the auditors are also their clients as well. So as long as we sort of are pushing back all together, I think there's no chance of us finding a good resolution to this. But maybe working together we can.
Well, to that point of working together, is there a need for some kind of organization, and maybe it already exists, that is discussing all these things that we need industry consensus on? Jennifer, what do you think?
Well, I mean, we have the 4As, and that is part of what we do. And they have new leadership, and we are just now being pulled back together. There sort of was a hiatus with Corona and changes with leadership, but they're bringing it back together. And these are conversations that, you know, we need to be having across small, mid-size, and large agencies, and talking about, you know, ways that we think we can help guide the industry. So there are groups out there that are doing it. To Frank's point, I feel like we've been hearing day, date, and time for 10 years, and we still haven't seen any change. So to that point, it's what do you have to do to actually make the change happen? And so
Yeah,
I think, you know, talking about it like this is a good start.
Yeah. No, I was thinking more about, rather than just an agency, it's some kind of group that's looking at it from both the buyer and the seller standpoint. Am I crazy? Does this not make sense?
I hope you're okay, Jen. I think it's absolutely, I'll step in and talk while you recover. I think that you're seeing a lot of different groups coming together in this. So I know the VAB's launched a task force. Certainly we're jousting about this on the MRC TV committee. I think the MRC has done some work in creating a white paper on how auditors should audit local broadcast buys and agencies. I think the ANA needs to come in and have client discussion while the 4As is doing it with the agencies. So I think you're going to see much more conversation on it. I think these panels are really helpful, and I can't wait to hear what kind of questions we get. So I think we just need to keep doing that.
Okay. And speaking of questions, I have a few of them here. I'm going to just take them one in turn, each in turn rather. Hang on one moment while I pull them up so I can read them. Okay. So being that Apple 14.5 has effectively turned off data sharing with social and search partners, driving up CPMs 50 to 100% in the third quarter, is this type of over-the-air television closed loop attribution even helpful or required going forward? Should we not be just moving to the proper attribution tool, being the advertiser's cash register? Anybody want to tackle that? Nobody. Okay.
I mean, I'll take a stab. I mean, I think that's what, you know, what Jen and Frank were talking about earlier, just around, you know, performance-based, audience-based. And I think that's, you know, sort of what I'm hearing from there is, you know, how do we circumvent rising CPM costs by sort of getting out of thinking about it as a cost per thousand for an age and gender target, and instead think about you know, outcome-based results. And sure, I mean, I think we're all in that exploratory mode right now.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the outcomes-based approach, you know, requires a level of sharing with client data that sometimes, you know, they're not as comfortable doing. They may not be sophisticated and even have that data in a place that we can calibrate it. I think some of the interesting things that Jen and her team are doing with these different audience platforms, aggregating client data together with measurement data too, gives us different ways of doing it. But I think we got a long way to go before we understand how all those work. We also have, to Jen's point, the market mix modelers, you know, stuck on their bases of doing it a certain way. So we have a lot of moving pieces there, but I think that's definitely where we need to go.
Another person in the audience would like you to talk a little bit about blockchain for advertising. Can you talk a little bit about how that's developing and if that's part of the Spot TV system at this point?
Not at this point. I think we're way out from anything that would revolve around that.
Okay.
I don't know if anybody disagrees, but I don't see it.
Okay. All right. So another question is, okay, I think we addressed this, but I'm going to say it anyway, just in case there's anything else that you guys want to add, which is how realistic is it to expect national and local TV ad buyers to drop gender, age, CPM impressions and accept household impressions with attributed modeled gender age demos?
I think the question is what happens when you switch methodologies in a currency. That, I mean, that's what I'm actually hearing in the question, and I think that's tough. But I want everyone to start thinking about that in the industry, because we sort of need to let that go. Again, we're talking about outcome based buys. We need to prepare ourselves that that maybe currency isn't age and gender based. And that is tough, because I talked earlier about consistency. And one of the ways that you know that you're getting a good deal this year versus last year or the year before is because you've got years and years and years of historical data to compare it to. And when we switch to a new currency, that knowledge is gone, right? And so I think, but I do think we need to prepare for that and actually free ourselves from that if there's a better approach on the horizon.
Yeah, I'll just, sorry, y'all, that water went down the wrong pipe, so that was not graceful. So I would say that, you know, as an advertiser, the holy grail for us is defining the right audience and the right target. And then being able to buy on that audience in a linear fashion is like the holy grail. Like, we're always saying how we want to get to that one-to-one and we want to get to that addressability. We would love to get there. Do we have the technology to do that just yet? No. Do we have the right measurement to do that yet? No. But would we love to get there? Absolutely. So I feel like people are talking about it. I mean, internally, we are always having discussions about what does the future look like across all of our channels. Like, we sit with our investment leads and we're looking at it. We just need more technology, more measurement. But we want to find the best way to be buying those audiences that are going to be converting and doing whatever the business KPI is for that particular client. So I think that, yes, it's coming. It's just going to take us a little while to get there.
We are about 2 minutes out from the end of the session, and there was one more question that I wanted to ask you guys, which relates to multi-platform transactions. At this point, I'd like to throw this out to the buyers on the panel. Are you doing transactions that involve not only local spot, but local spots, other forms of other opportunities at this point? Jennifer, are you?
Yes, absolutely. Particularly, we're seeing a lot of it around sports, specials, promotions, news. And I think that this is a great opportunity for us with political coming next year and the level of preemptions that we're likely going to see again. To be able to have seamless fluidity to go back and forth is going to be really helpful. So, you know, I think you're going to continue to see more and more as we go forward. But yes.
How about you, Brad? What's your
100% agree. We're in the same position and feel the same way.
Okay, Frank, how are you seeing? Are there a lot of transactions that are coming over the transom that involve multi-platform at EW Scripts?
It's emerging. I think you know, it's heartening to me to hear my comrades there on the buying side say we'll consider cross-platform make goods. I'm interpreting that you said that because as we have make goods, we need to move them around. The value of a linear and a video impression are there. I think we talked about that before, of the true value of it, but certainly we want to move impressions wherever there's avails to take care of this when we have preemptions and such, politically in particular.
Yeah, I think, Frank, the challenge with that is going to be scale. So some markets and stations, it's going to be easier than others because you're making up those same impressions. So that could present a challenge, but it's absolutely doable. And I think the other thing that I would put as a call out for stations is unique inventory. So, if I'm doing one of those aggregators and I've got 2 stations using an aggregator and I'm doing make goods, I could potentially be duplicating myself all over the place. So anytime you can bring forward unique inventory or unique news, that to us is more valuable of an offering to do the back and forth of the make goods.
Eric, I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to get to you because there is Michael Depp telling me that our time is up. So I just want to thank so much all of our panelists, Eric Cavanaugh from Publicis Media, Jennifer Hunger-Buehler from Dentsu, Frank Friedman from Scripps, and Brad Thompson from UM Worldwide. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Janet.